Emmanuel Macron says he will stay in office for the remaining 2.5 years of his second term, despite his latest setback when Michel Barnier's government was toppled in a vote of no confidence on Wednesday. Macron addressed the nation on Thursday night and blamed the far left and far right for bringing down the government. That has drawn a sharp rebuke from the opposition, who say Macron himself bears the responsibility. Here's Leo McGuinn.
He may not have named a new Prime Minister during his speech on Thursday, but President Emmanuel Macron did provide the next PM with a guideline.
I will instruct them to form a government of general interest, representing all the political forces of a government that can participate in it, or at least undertake not to censor it.
For Macron, it is crystal clear who's responsible for the government instability.
The extreme right and extreme left united in an anti-republican front.
But according to the New Popular Front and the National Rally, the president is completely ignoring the results of the summer's legislative elections.
He's ignoring the reality of a new political order. 2/3 of the Parliament are National Rally deputies and those under the banner of NUPES. That's what the French people wanted.
He comes across as a president who is in charge of everything but responsible for nothing.
Emmanuel Macron received leaders from several parties on Friday in order to discuss forming a new government. The National Rally, Ecologists and France Unbowed were all notable in their absence. They have all been excluded from discussions over the new Prime Minister, set to be named in the coming days.
And for more on this unfolding story in France, we can bring in Helen Drake, who is Professor of French and European Studies at Loughborough University in London. Good afternoon, Helen. Emmanuel Macron says he's staying on. How strong of a hand, if any, does he have?
Great question. That was a key part of his speech, wasn't it? That he said the speech was all about responsibility, about choices and about decisions. And he was clear that he said he'd stay on because, and he's right, he was democratically elected for 5 years and he's got another, 2.5 years to run. But as you're sort of implying, he's got a problem, which is legitimacy. Even at the beginning, sort of in 2017 when he was first elected, and then definitely again in 2022 when he was re-elected, he has suffered from a lot of unpopularity. And I'd say, it's got to the point where others have talked about the fact that he's hated. And so, on the one hand, he has got a democratic mandate, and his speech was actually quite presidential. It was pure Macron, a bit shorter than normal, but it was lofty. It was very rational. He was looking at the future. He was looking at the international context. Very, as I say, very sort of reasonable and rational. But he so very presidential. But he lacks the sort of the popularity that you would expect from a president. And I think it's worth saying that the fact that there's talk in the air of his resignation, i.e., his opponents who would like him to resign, or even talk of, let's call it impeachment, that in itself is quite something that's quite, that's quite a serious development in the legitimacy of not just of President Macron, but the presidency itself.
And Macron took aim at both the far-left France Unbowed party last night and the far-right National Rally. He blamed them for taking down Michel Barnier's government. But they say the responsibility lies with him. Does Macron have a point here, or do the opposition?
Yeah, I mean, we are in a sort of a real logjam. He does have a point in that technically it was the votes of those two groups that you just mentioned that brought him down. And he was at pains to say in his speech as well that those two extremes, as he describes them, were aided and abetted in that vote by others sort of more central, if you like, that had been that had not so long ago been governing. So he was critical, for example, of the Socialists and other parties that are typically in the mainstream. So he was right technically that those votes brought him down. But those parties that you just referred to, they're blaming him, and he did sort of engage in a little bit of a mea culpa. They're saying, look, back in June, Macron dissolved the National Assembly, which he did. He called new elections, which he did. And he said that last night. He said, maybe, he didn't say it was a bad idea, but he said that it was probably poorly understood, which again is seen as very sort of arrogant. by those who dislike him so much. So yeah, he said that I was right to call those elections, but you see the results of those elections returned. It's complicated, isn't it? But they returned significant votes and seats for the far right and the far left. And Macron then went ahead and appointed Michel Barnier, an individual from the from the Republican mainstream party, which didn't have a good showing in the election. So it's sort of understandable that so Macron constitutionally is allowed to, or it's his responsibility to nominate the prime minister, but because he is sort of refusing to pick a prime minister from either of the parties or the groups that did so well in the election, it's kind of not surprising that he finds himself in this impasse. And it looks as if he's still going to the centre, let's call it, for his next pick of prime minister. So that's not going to go down very well either with his opponents.
Yeah, as you say there, he's sort of narrowing the scope once again.
Yeah.
The president says that Barnier's replacement will be swiftly chosen, in contrast to the 2-month search for a prime minister back in the summer. Do you think he already has the replacement in mind?
Yes, and well, I'm not in the inner circle, but I mean, from what I can understand, yes, he does. He's looking to somebody called François Bayrou, who's been around a long, long time, who's, let's call him, a centrist from the Modem party. So he's still sort of looking to an individual who represents politicians and voters who are kind of pro-Macron or Macroniste or Macron compatible, as they like to call it. So, and I think the urgency as well is, well, as you know, it's understandable. It's because there's this question of the budget. France has to pass, and Macron last night talked about a special law to get through the budget, a temporary budget, if you like, for next year, 2025. And then his intention is that the new government will sit down and sort of calmly compose or sort of create a more long-term budget. So, he's really, he is running out of options. But I think it's probably helpful to look at this in terms of sort of what's got to happen in the short term. And I just mentioned the budget. And so, yes, he will be looking for a prime minister a lot quicker. But then I think if we look sort of further ahead, so Marine Le Pen and so on, they're trying to force him to resign, which he said he wouldn't do. So let's say that the next presidential elections will be at the end of his term in 2027. I mean, between now and then, there's going to have to be some discussion about the constitution itself and about the role of the presidency. So, yeah, in the short term, yes, there'll be a prime minister quickly. They will. There's some sort of signs that there's some sort of willingness to not bring down the new government in the short term in order to get the budget through. But then medium term and longer term, I do think French politics rather, has come to some sort of turning point. I mean, it does meet a couple of the definitions of a crisis. So there's high uncertainty and there's urgency. Whether there's a threat or not, like a third criterion of crisis, well, that remains to be seen, maybe.
Thank you very much for that. Helen Drake, Professor of French and European Studies at Loughborough University in London.
Well, thank you.